We welcome George Stoya III from Sooner Scoop, and there has been a lot of news in Norman. Tons of transfer portal goings, I guess, coming into the portal, going from Oklahoma, but none bigger than quarterback Dillon Gabriel, the Sooners starter the last 2 years. He is on the market. George, how expected was this, and how did the timeline work for Dillon Gabriel to decide, okay, I'm going to the portal?
Yeah, Andy, it was one of those things that I think a week ago we would have been shocked by that. But I think over the weekend we kind of heard some rumblings. And look, at the end of the day, it kind of makes sense when you think about it from Dylan's perspective and where this thing is headed in college football in terms of NIL and having the opportunity to go make, honestly, a buttload of money. We'll see what he's offered. I know some of the figures out there. Is it going to be around $1 million, $2 million to go play for some of these programs? And the honest truth is the writing was on the wall here at Oklahoma. I mean, Jackson Arnold is somebody that committed to Oklahoma 2 years ago, 5-star recruit, one of the best quarterbacks in the country in his class, somebody that is the future here at OU. And so it made a lot of sense for, I think, everyone involved. Dillon can go out, play one more year. It'll be his 6th year of college football. Go play for a big program, compete for maybe a national title, maybe become the all-time leader in passing yards and passing touchdowns in college football, which I know is a goal of his. And then OU can move on to Jackson Arnold in what they believe is going to be the next great quarterback at Oklahoma. So look, do I think this was a decision that going into the year Dillon was going to do? No, I think that his intention was to probably go to the NFL. But the way the season played out, how well he played, and you look around the country in terms of NIL and the money that's being thrown out there, he'd probably make a lot more money going to, say, an Oregon or a USC or some of the other schools that have been thrown out there than he would, being a late round draft pick or going undrafted, because that's honestly where his draft stock is at. So I think this was a decision that was made probably in the last couple weeks. He looked at his options financially and said, hey, why not stick around one more year, go to a big program and make a lot of money, and also hand the keys off to Jackson Arnold.
So you used a unit of measure in that answer, and it got me thinking of that Saturday Night Live skit a few weeks ago with Nate Bargatze as George Washington, where he's talking about his dream for America. And we will call 2,000 pounds a ton. But, sir, what will we call 1,000 pounds? Nothing. So, George, I ask you this. Exactly how much is a buttload?
Millions. And that's the market price, Andy. Like, that's what's crazy is these guys that are going in the portal, and it's not just quarterbacks. I mean, I think some of these defensive linemen that are in the portal or are going to be in the portal, these schools are paying a lot of money for. And I do think that somebody like a Dillon Gabriel that has the experience that he has and is in my opinion, the best quarterback in the transfer portal right now, some schools going to offer him $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million, maybe more. I mean, that's the number that I know Matt Rule threw out there at Nebraska. What was it, a couple weeks ago? And I do think that he's going to be able to leverage that because he's going to have so many schools calling him. And one of the ones that we've heard is Oregon. And we all know the type of NIL money that Oregon has. They can play with just about anybody in that game. And so I do think Dillon's going to be able to get a lot of money. And it's not one of those things that Oklahoma doesn't have the NIL money. Oklahoma's done one of the better jobs in the country at NIL money. They're just preferring to give it to somebody like Jackson Arnold, who's going to be here 2 or 3 more years.
Well, and that's what I'd like to have you explain that to the folks, because I think this is something that people kind of miss sometimes in situations like this. Is like, how can you let Dillon Gabriel leave? Because if you keep Dillon Gabriel, it means Jackson Arnold probably leaves.
Yeah, and that's the world we live in, is when you have somebody of Jackson Arnold's caliber who could also go just about anywhere in the country. I think a lot of schools would take him right now, even though he hasn't played a whole lot of football yet. That's what Oklahoma's dealing with is, do you want to lose Dillon Gabriel and lose 1 year of him, which he could be incredible next year. I mean, he could go win the Heisman Trophy or at least compete for it and help you compete for a national title. Or do you want to lose a guy in Jackson Arnold who they believe can be a Heisman contender, be just as good as Dillon Gabriel, if not better? I mean, he definitely has the tools to be a great quarterback in terms of what he can do with his arm. And you get to have him for 2, maybe 3 years. And that was always the plan. I mean, they were trying to redshirt him this year to keep him for 4 years. I think he's going to be too good for that. But obviously, Dillon goes down in the BYU game and they have to burn it. But this is a situation where Oklahoma feels very comfortable handing the keys to Jackson Arnold. I mean, he committed to Oklahoma, like I said, 2 years ago. I believe in some industry standards, he was ranked as the number one quarterback in his class. I mean, he's a guy that can do a lot of different things and is the future of this program. And it's been known for a while. I mean, Brent Venables said back in training camp, we know this is Dillon's last year and we have to get Jackson ready. So this has always been the plan for Oklahoma. I know there's some people out there like, well, how can you get rid of Dillon Gabriel? I don't think it was them pushing him out the door necessarily. Dillon knows what was going on. He knew the plan. And he even said on the radio today, he went on the local radio here in Oklahoma and said, hey, Jackson's ready and we all know it. And I'm excited to see what he can do at Oklahoma. So I think this, again, was something that was good for all parties.
Yeah, I think we're going to see this in a few different places where you have somebody who has a COVID year and the coaches can't really account for that as they recruit. Like they have to recruit as if you're going to leave when you're supposed to leave. And that person has an opportunity. Like, I look at Dillon Gabriel's situation and I look at Michael Penix Jr. and Bo Nix. Like they could have gone to the NFL last year and they would be on rosters right now. But I think they're in a better position to go to the NFL now. And Dillon Gabriel, I think about, you've mentioned Oregon, USC is obviously a potential option. Ohio State has a job opening right now. These are all places where I'm envisioning him in their offense. And I'm like, ooh, that would be fun.
Yeah, exactly, Andy. And I think that he is going to end up going to one of those major programs. And with the 12-team playoff next year, there's a good chance he's going to get to play in that. And I think that that's part of why he wants to do this. And I think it does come down to, it's not all about the money for Dillon Gabriel, but I'm sure he looks at it and says, well, how much money would I make as a 7th round draft pick versus, and being on probably a practice squad for an entire year versus getting to play one more year of college football, compete at a high level, and maybe make $2 million in NIL. I mean, you're talking about doubling what your salary would probably be as a rookie quarterback for a team that probably doesn't envision you being a starter anytime soon. So I think him putting it on the back burner and also saying, hey, maybe I can even improve my draft stock another year. Especially look at what Bo Nix has done at Oregon. Yeah. I think that's a perfect example. If you go to Oregon and you have a type of year that Bo Nix has had and you're sitting in New York next year, maybe winning the Heisman and possibly competing in the playoff, why would you not do that if you're Dillon Gabriel?
Well, Kalen DeBoer can call up and be like, listen, I know how to coach lefties.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I'm sure that's part of his thought process. I mean, it's the same thing. I don't think he's going to end up at Mississippi State with Jeff Lebby. I know that was
my next question, because that is kind of the obvious connection.
I don't think that's going to happen. I think Dillon knows that that's a project down in Starkville. And whereas, like you said, he can go to an Oregon or Ohio State or USC and plug right into a team that can compete, one, for a national title, and two, has the weapons around him. I mean, imagine him going to Ohio State with the type of wide receivers that they have there and the type of offense that they run. Whereas, look, he's obviously very comfortable with Jeff and had a great year this year. But the reality is at Mississippi State, that's a program that if they get to bowl eligible, that's a big win next year. And I think Dillon has bigger aspirations than that. I also don't know what Mississippi State's NIL situation is, whereas, again, in Oregon, Ohio State, USC, some of those bigger programs are going to be able to pay up immediately.
So let's talk about the other guys from Oklahoma who are in the portal. There were quite a few names. There's some surprises, but I'm not sure I was terrifically surprised by anybody. But two backs, Marcus Major, Tyree Walker, Key Lawrence, the safety. Those are the ones that feels like they had the most playing time contribution and are now moving on.
Yeah, it's an interesting group because I think most OU fans and media look at it and say, well, they're not really losing a ton of production. I think Tyree Walker's one, obviously, a guy that came in and as a walk-on from a JUCO school, somebody that really made a name for himself this year, but he got banged up towards the end of the year. It's also Gavin Sawchuk's show moving forward. I mean, that's the reality, is that they ran him a lot more down the stretch. And you also look at who they're bringing in their recruiting class. They're bringing in the number one running back in the country in Taylor Tatum, somebody that they believe can come in and help them day one. So that's why you're seeing guys like Tyree Walker, Marcus Major, even Dalen Smothers, a true freshman, 3 running backs go in the portal for Oklahoma. They feel really good about the young guys that they're bringing in, and also the guys that are returning, and Gavin Sawchuk and Javonte Barnes. So I think that that's part of it. I think you look at Savion Byrd, started a few games at guard for Oklahoma. That was one that I think some people thought was a surprise, but really had an up and down year. Got benched several times, ended up getting beat out by a true freshman, Caden Green, at left guard. So I think they, again, feel good about maybe some of the younger guys. And Savion is definitely somebody that I think just needs some new scenery. And then you
Mhm.
mentioned Keith Lawrence at safety. Was a starter for part of the year, then ends up getting benched at the, in the Bedlam game, and really didn't see the field the rest of the year. And you talk about Billy Bowman possibly coming back, somebody that they think can be an All-American safety next year. You got Peyton Bowen, the 5-star freshman, that played a lot this season, so they feel really good about their depth there. So again, it's a lot of guys that have entered the portal for Oklahoma. I think some of them is processing in terms of trying to get guys room so that they can go out and get different players in the portal. And they do feel really good about this portal class in terms of what they're able to go get talent wise. And I do think that they also feel really good. I mean, they've got a really large recruiting class coming in. I think it's up to 27, 28 different commits right now coming in for next year. So they really like the guys that they're bringing in on the recruiting trail. And they're also going to be pretty active in the transfer portal.
Yeah, it was a case last year where they used the portal pretty well and seriously upgraded their talent, especially on defense. But they are now going to the SEC where they're going to need even more talent, especially on the line of scrimmage. Where do you see them focusing their shopping within the portal?
I think you need to look at Texas A&M. Obviously, they're losing their defensive line coach, Elijah Robinson. He's going to Syracuse to be their defensive coordinator. There's a lot of guys on that Texas A&M defensive line that Oklahoma finished second in their recruitment. And if some of those guys enter the portal, I know there's already been a couple out there to go in the portal. I think Oklahoma is going to be really involved there. I think you also look at Chris McClellan, going in
Florida.
from Florida. He's a local kid, played at Owasso High School in Tulsa, somebody that Oklahoma recruited a couple years ago. I wouldn't be shocked if that's a name to watch. And then I just think across the country, there's just several guys, whether it's at Michigan State. I know they have several guys that Oklahoma started to follow and maybe connect with. Thor Griffith, the defensive lineman from Harvard. He is somebody that I know Oklahoma has reached out to. I wouldn't be shocked if he visits OU. So I think that they've got their eyes set on several defensive linemen. And I think they're also kind of waiting to see if any more guys enter. We all know that, with the bowl games and the playoffs, sometimes guys don't enter till a little bit later. And so I think Oklahoma's being patient. But you're right. They're definitely going to look at the defensive line. That's what they did last year. I mean, they brought in a Dejon Terry from Tennessee, Jacob Lacey from Notre Dame, two guys that could technically come back next year. And I think they're recruiting them to come back for maybe a fifth or sixth year. Rondell Bothroyd from Wake Forest on the edge. So you've got a list of guys that they were able to get last year in the portal up front. And I think they're trying to go big again because they do have a nice recruiting class coming in up front. When you talk about, a David Stone and Danny Okoye, two guys that are really highly recruited in this class on the defensive line, but you want to go out and get some experience, especially because OU is losing some of those guys up front that they got last year.
Well, and how do they feel? How did Brent Venables and his staff feel about their talent level as it stands now with these freshmen coming in?
I think they feel really good. You look at what they did this season, they were much improved. Every statistic defensively, they improved. I think offensively as well, they were very efficient compared to what they were last year. And that's part of why you see them, just elevating from within in terms of staff members and the new offensive coordinator and Seth Luttrell and Joe John Finley as co-OCs, is they feel like they have a lot of momentum heading into 2024, and they feel like they can compete in the SEC, but they also know they have to go get a little bit more talent, a little bit more experience, because that experience goes a long way. I mean, you talk about some of the guys that I mentioned earlier, Dejon Terry, Rondell Bothroyd, Jacob Lacey. They played a lot of the snaps this year, and they were all from the portal. And so while I think they feel really good about the talent level that they're bringing in, it takes time. Some of those freshmen, it takes time for those guys to develop and be ready for the game. As well as they've been recruiting, they know that they need some experience to help fill that gap before those guys are ready.
Well, and offensive tackle, that's a position where guys are going to the NFL, a more standard situation where, Tyler Guyton is the one the scouts just drool over, and then Walter Rouse, I believe, is out of eligibility. But how do they replenish there?
That's a great question. That's the other spot. It's offensive and defensive line, which is, probably a lot of the programs around the country right now are looking for offensive and defensive linemen. But you mentioned, Walter Rouse, out of eligibility, did a really good job for Oklahoma this year, probably better than a lot of people anticipated at left tackle coming from Stanford. And so they're going to have to go out and probably get at least 3 or 4 guys on the offensive line. They lost several in the portal, like I mentioned, Savion Byrd, Nate Anderson. You lose Andrew Rame, the starting center for the last 3 years. He's going to be headed to the NFL as well. And so you're talking about bringing back Caden Green, Jacob Sexton, 2 guys, 2 freshmen that played a lot of football this year, but you have to replace a lot too. You have Troy Everett, the transfer from Appalachian State. He'll probably slot in at center. And then you're looking at trying to replace that right guard spot and right tackle. And I know they've already started reaching out to several tackles in the portal. I know Spencer Brown from Michigan State, one of the highly coveted tackles in the portal, J.C. Davis from New Mexico. So I bet they're going to be very active in terms of trying to replace that, because they have some young guys, Andy, but it's a lot of guys, kind of like the defensive line, that haven't played a lot of football. So if you can go out and get maybe one of those super seniors that have played at a Power 5 program, or even a J.C. Davis, who I know NFL scouts really like from New Mexico, if you can go get somebody with some experience and somebody that has a lot of upside, sort of like Walter Rouse this last year from Stanford, you can plug him in for 1 year, then you're sitting in a really good spot.
Yeah, and those are the hardest guys to get. But Oklahoma seems to have done a good job on both lines of scrimmage, taking guys out of the portal and either being able to plug them in right away, or if they have some eligibility and they came from the group of 5 level, like the ascendant starting center, developing them.
Yeah, and that's what, Bill Beatenbow, the offensive line coach, really prides himself on. I mean, you look at the production that he's had. I think he's had more offensive linemen go in the NFL draft in the last 10 years than I think any other offensive line coach in the country. So he's somebody that, that's what Walter Rouse came to Oklahoma. He was considering OU and Nebraska, and I think Nebraska actually offered him more NIL money, but he chose Oklahoma because of Bill Beatenbow. And so I think that's something that he definitely prides himself off. I know Todd Bates, the defensive line coach as well, very highly regarded in terms of what he was able to do both at Clemson and now Oklahoma, helping some of these guys get to the next level as well. So I think that's really helped them when you have 2 coaches that are so highly respected, like a Todd Bates and Bill Beatenbow. It's a very attractive destination, especially for guys like a Spencer Brown, like I mentioned, that or Walter Rouse this last year, that might be on the fringe of being drafted, and then they can come to a place like Oklahoma, play on the biggest stage, and get developed into somebody that can improve their draft stock.
So how excited are folks locally for the start of the Jackson Arnold era against a pretty good Arizona team that I would assume they're bringing most of their people to the bowl game?
Yeah. Well, look, I think that people are very excited. Let me just put it this way. Last year, all offseason, all we heard was, well, when's Jackson Arnold going to start? He's going to definitely beat out Dylan Gabriel halfway through the season. So now that it is finally his time to take over, I think people are super pumped. And I think OU fans were disappointed in not getting into a New Year's Six Bowl. And a lot of people thought they should have when you look at their resume. And I think they look at the matchup and they're like, Arizona, like what kind of matchup is that? And you're playing in the Alamo Bowl, which isn't as big of a stage and all that. But I think as soon as we found out that Dylan Gabriel was leaving and that Jackson is likely going to start the bowl game, I think people got a lot more excited, especially because, look, Arizona's a good football team. Winners of 6 in a row. Jed Fish has got that program headed in the right direction. I don't expect them to have almost any opt-outs. I don't think they've had a ton of guys hit the portal. So I think that it's going to be a really good test for Oklahoma. And it's going to be interesting to see, what does OU's offense look like? They have a whole new play caller in Seth Luttrell. Is it more of what Jeff Lebby was doing this year, or is it more of the air raid and what Seth Luttrell was doing at North Texas and North Carolina, Indiana, Kansas, all the places that he's coached before? Looks a little bit different. And obviously, Jackson's been learning Jeff's system all year. So what does it look like to get 15 practices and prepare as the starter in an offense that he hasn't really played in yet? So I think people are pretty excited for the game.
Well, and you should be excited too, because you can get a breakfast torta at La Panteria, and that's what really matters here. So
yeah, me and Eddie will have to put that up.
You absolutely will. You have drawn a very good bowl assignment. I don't care what the Oklahoma fans think about being left out of the NY6. You're going to do all right for yourself, George. Thank you so much, and have fun in San Antonio.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Andy.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.